Hey folks, real quick before we dive in today, I know most of you have already heard, but yes, the Brian Nichols Show has officially joined the Lions of Liberty Network, and I couldn't be more pumped. You can catch new episodes every Thursday over on the Lions feed, including our new group show, Politics. Yeah, ticks like the bloodsuckers, because that's exactly what we're exposing over in Washington. Now, don't worry. Everything else you know and love about the Brian Nichols Show is still dropping right here on our main feeds. And by the way, speaking of bloodsuckers, today's episode dives into the authoritarianism that's creeping back into Eastern Europe, specifically Georgia, and why it matters more than ever right now. All right, let's jump in.
And also, there have been a lot of surveys back in Georgia as well that just showcase that, yes, we want European future, we want to be in EU, we want to be NATO members, and that's why over 200 days there have been non-stop protests, and people go to that protest with the mentality that they know that they might exit their houses, and most likely they won't come back because they would be imprisoned, or they would get a huge fine, or sometimes even worse. And I unfortunately mean what I'm saying. It's very big mindset to have, that you want this very normal lifestyle. We don't want to be in front of the parliament protesting very normal things like fair elections, fair media, non-governmental organizations, or having a simple institutions.
Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to the Brian Nichols Show. Well, hey there, folks. Brian Nichols here on another fun-filled episode, yes, of the Brian Nichols Show. I am, as always, your humble host, joining you from our lovely Cardio Miracle Studios here in Eastern Indiana. The Brian Nichols Show is powered, yes, by the best heart health supplement in the world, Cardio Miracle. If you want to learn more how to lower your blood pressure, lower your resting heart rate while improving your pump at the gym, stick around. We're going to talk about that more later in today's episode. But first, we're skipping over to Eastern Europe once again, because as the world is still on fire, it's important to understand how that fire started. So joining us here today is Lika K. Lika, welcome to the Brian Nichols Show. How you doing?
Hi, I'm good. Thanks for inviting me. How are you?
I'm doing well. We had a little chat before I hit the record button. I said, Lika, I'm not even going to try to pronounce your last name because I'm just going to be honest with myself. I know I'm going to butcher it. So, Lika, share us your actual name, not Lika K. And then also just tell us a little bit of the story of your background growing up in Eastern Europe.
Yeah, of course. First of all, thank you so much again for inviting me. My name is Lika Kobeshavidze. I know it's a tough one, and quite a long one as well. I am a political writer from Georgia and a fellow at Young Voices. I'm currently finishing my master's degree in European Studies in Lund University in Sweden. And growing up in Eastern Europe, more specifically in Georgia, has definitely been a wonderful, but at the same time, of course, challenging experience, especially now in regards that our government is drifting more into the authoritarian drift and regime in general. So especially now, of course, I don't live there currently, but of course, it's still heartbreaking to see everything that's happening.
Now, Lika, you mentioned Georgia. You're not talking about Atlanta, Georgia. You're talking about Georgia, the country, over in Eastern Europe. That's right. Formerly part of the old Soviet Union. Now you're your own country. And obviously, we've seen, where we are today with the Ukrainian and Russian conflict. A lot of what's happening over there today is echoes of what happened 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago and beyond. So before we dig into where we are today, do us a favor, just kind of set the stage here of what was life like in the pre-current world order we see today, back when you had the Soviet Union, and how do we fast forward to where we are today, where despite being your own individual country, starting to have more of those Soviet style type of persuasions? What are your thoughts there?
Of course, it's definitely been a hurricane time. I would say the transformation and transition period from the Soviet Union has been a very difficult one. It's different for me because I wasn't raised in Soviet Union. I was born already in the free country. But of course, you always see this cultural significance and the similarities that so much reflect today's generation. Especially understanding that my parents and the older generation went through this hurricane time, which even explaining it sometimes feel like telling horror movie, especially after the collapse of Soviet Union, when all of these rules people had just collapsed, and there were no institutions, no police, no order, nothing, basically. So people really lived through this hurricane time, especially after, ever since my childhood. I was 8. In 2008, we had a war, and it's one of the heartbreaking thing is that, of course, everyone talks about war in Ukraine, what is happening today, and it's horrible. But everyone forgets that we experienced the same thing in 2008, and our territory was occupied as well. And it was one of the most difficult 5 days, especially in the recent history, that my country experienced, and we still face the consequences today, especially now when we have adequate of the Russian law existing today, and also our government who rigged the election and stayed in the power for more than 12 years at this point. And it's very heartbreaking to see the country that was one of the leader in the region, who was doing all the democratic changes, doing our best to achieve the European Union membership, NATO membership, and become a developed country. And now we are so far back, basically at the same place where we were in 90s period or early 20th. So it's actually very heartbreaking to see it right now.
Very interesting. Lika, do us a favor and just help address the question. I know we often get asked quite a bit here, looking at the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. I'm wondering if this, same church, different pew kind of thing, where it applies to Georgia. But there's an argument saying, listen, you look at the Ukrainian conflict, half of Ukraine, which more in the borderlands of Russia, they're much more actually in tune with the Russian culture. They're much more ethnically Russian. They don't want to be part of this, quote unquote, new world order. They don't want to join NATO. They don't want to join the EU. They want to be culturally Russian, I guess, is the argument. Is there merit in that type of an argument, not just from the Ukrainian perspective, but let's look at Georgia, for example. Is there an argument that makes sense, saying, hey, a lot of the folks here, even though we're promoting this pro-democratic, pro-democracy mentality, the people actually living here tend to want to be more ethnically, culturally what they have been for generations at this point?
Well, there's a very simple reason in both cases, or in Georgia and Ukraine, that no, even though, of course, Ukrainians and Russians share a lot of similarities, for example, where their language comes from the same family. But it's a very big insult to tell Ukrainian you are the same. And also the narrative Russia is trying to portray is completely false, because even from the historical perspective, it was Kievskaya Rus. It was not Russian Ukrainian. The Kievskaya Rus basically means that Russia kind of forwarded afterwards. So the saying as things like we are the same, and basically we have to create this whole unity, which already existed back in the days, and we saw the consequences of it, is completely unrealistic, irrelevant, and also offensive. And also there have been a lot of surveys back in Georgia as well that just showcase that, yes, we want European future, we want to be in EU, we want to be NATO members. And that's why for over 200 days there have been non-stop protests, and people go to that protest with the mentality that they know that they might exit their houses, and most likely they won't come back because they would be imprisoned, or they would get a huge fine, or sometimes even worse. And I unfortunately mean what I'm saying. It's very big mindset to have, that you want this very normal lifestyle. We don't want to be in front of the parliament protesting very normal things like fair elections, fair media, non-governmental organizations, or having a simple institutions. This is not what we want, and whatever Russia is portraying is horrible, because basically every country they intervened with, or during the Soviet Union, they never develop it. It's just, for example, they occupy one of the best regions in Georgia, Abkhazia, which also called Abkhazia in other languages, and they occupied it during 1990s, and it is as destroyed as it was after the war. They never develop. They don't do anything good in the countries they invade. And also saying that we are the same people and your country just should not exist, and you should be in alliance and under our governance is very offensive. And most there, of course, might be 10%. That's also very big percentage. I would say elderly people who lived in Soviet Union and for some weird reasons they really enjoyed it, not having freedom or not being able to express themselves. They might still want to idolize that period, but especially when I look at my parents' generation, especially my generation, we don't want that. We just want very normal lifestyle like European countries are having, for example.
Well, let's compare and contrast Georgia with some other European countries. And how about, countries that were also former parts of the Soviet bloc? You look at countries like Poland, for example. Right now, Poland, I had back in the show a guest where we were talking about how Poland is, quote unquote, leading by example. They're being the right type of ally the United States should look to partner with because excuse me, Poland is actually going through and they're building up their military. They're establishing a very strong nationalist base. And they're leading by example. So I guess comparing and contrasting, Lika, with Georgia and Poland, what are some things you think Georgia could learn from Poland, if anything?
Well, I would say that our past is not that similar. Poland, of course, had socialistic past, but we were core members of the Soviet Union. So it's, of course, different. And geographically speaking, they are more to the west. Our geographical location is very challenging with Russia having us, with us having Russia on our border. But I would say, of course, Poland is on a great path currently, since they also changed the government. And I think one of the great lessons we can learn is that the opposition, one of the reasons why they have this united opposition, and Poland is actually moving forward with a great path, is that the opposition united and they acted as the one force. And I think that is the unity we are lacking today in Georgia, even though our opposition is, of course, trying, and they are moving in this very hurricane times and very challenging period. But I would say this unity is what is missing compared to Poland, because that was the key reason why they won the elections and they gained so much favor from the people because they voted for them.
What do you think from a cultural standpoint is missing right now with where Georgia is and where it should be? Because obviously there is a sentiment of some folks that they want to, it's funny. We've been talking about governments overstepping their bounds, taking more control and stripping away freedoms, all while promising to take care of you, right? Well, here's the hard truth. The more we outsource responsibility to the state, to big pharma, to anyone, the more we lose control over our own lives. And that includes our health. And that's why I take my health into my own hands, and why I've been using Cardio Miracle for over 2 years now. It's not just a supplement. It's part of my daily act of rebellion, because it gives me lower blood pressure, better energy, and a nitric oxide boost that doesn't require me to ask permission from a doctor or a bureaucrat. So, if you believe in personal responsibility, if you believe freedom starts with you, then do your heart a favor. Try Cardio Miracle today. Just scan that little QR code over my shoulder or head to cardiomiracle.com and use code TBNS at checkout for 15% off. One more time, that's code TBNS for 15% off at cardiomiracle.com. Your body, your choice, your miracle. And now, let's get back to the show. Go back towards this Soviet Union Russian mentality. So this show, we focus on sales and marketing, right? The art of persuasion and messaging. And I guess I look at this as being one of those really big battles. And we don't need to look no further than in our own country here in America. We saw this very much take place over the past calendar year, where the predominant culture in America, which was much more of this left-wing mentality, it got a slap in the face of reality, right? You watched as the cultural narratives, they started to crumble. The younger generation started saying, nah, this is goofball. And, in a very, very short time, we saw how the culture fundamentally flipped. I guess I'm asking, what's missing from Georgia? Why are we not seeing that type of reaction? And if we're not seeing that, what could we see from a sales messaging persuasion standpoint, Lika, on your perspective, right? That would actually move the needle towards a more like culturally pro-Georgian sentiment.
Yeah, of course, I completely get it. That's a very normal question from especially European countries to ask, why don't you just change the government? Why don't you have the new elections? That's very simple, right? It's a normal people's will to. If you don't like it and it's majority, you should have this opportunity. Unfortunately, when you're from post-Soviet bloc and you're not a member of the big unions such as European Union, even NATO, for example, which has this whole set of rules you have to follow, you basically have nowhere to go in order to protest it other than your countries. So, for example, when our elections were rigged last time, especially this time, and many other legal battles that we are fighting correctly, such as our government incorporating Russian law, our only way is to protest it on the streets, to demonstrate to our government that we are not fine with that. We don't want that. We don't want that future. But even then, they never go into the negotiations with us. Their only responses by force or imprisoning people or giving them fines. And today, so many young people are imprisoned for just defending their country and defending their very normal the rules that should just be there. And it's very frustrating. But of course, Georgia now should be, in my opinion, and maybe it's very optimistic thinking, but definitely a member of at least European Union, because we are Europe and we want to be a member of something bigger, something that has its own set of rules. And in case if you don't follow, there will be consequences. Because as it from now, our government doesn't really have those consequences. Of course, there are some fines that foreign governments, for example, Germany, France, they impose it on them. But unfortunately, unless it really, really deeply affects them, unless, for example, either European Union or even US gives them some slap in the face, to put it like that, unfortunately, there is no checks and balances system that will make them stop.
What would be the fundamental benefit of joining NATO or not the United Nations, the EU? I was confusing all my acronyms. No, so the United Nations is not what I'm talking about. The EU or NATO. What would be that tangible benefit for Georgia in your perspective?
The safety. For example, when you are a member of NATO, you're of course guaranteed that Russia won't invade you, because they have the 5th article. That means that if one of the members is invaded, the whole organization goes after you. So that's one of the reasons, for example, why when there is a war between Russia and Ukraine, they do its best to never affect the borders, for example, with the NATO member countries, because they know the consequences to where it would lead. It's basically the Third World War we will go into. That's one of the core reasons why I want to be the member of the NATO. And we had a chance a couple of years ago, but unfortunately Germany and France blocked this. Otherwise we would and that's one of the other reasons why the war in 2008 started. Russia will go to any extent to regain the power, to regain the control of the former Soviet blocs. And one of the sad part that, for example, the European Union in general doesn't understand, that whatever is happening now in Georgia and Ukraine is just a warning. It's just a pre-sequel to what will happen afterwards, because Russia has no stop, and we've already experienced it. And of course, many experts say that Soviet Union will never be created again. There is no way, but Russia is already doing it. And by occupying small regions of either Georgia or Ukraine, they are regaining those powers. And one of the core reasons why we want to join those unions, of course, with European Union, your economical situation depends on them, and you have to work your way up to be on the same stand as the European Union countries. That's economical improved situation, which now in Georgia is very bad. And of course, political safety, which both unions kind of guarantee you, especially NATO.
Let me ask a not tough question, but I guess a contextual question, because you mentioned France and Germany saying, nah, we don't want you guys in NATO back last time, right? You're approaching it from a Georgian self-interest. Is it fair to say that France, Germany, and all the other countries, or just folks in general who are not in favor with the idea of Georgia, Ukraine, name your country here, joining NATO or the EU, is it fair to say that they're also making that argument also based in their self-interest? And back to your point, it feels like, we're just a hop, skip, and a jump away from World War III, right? And nobody wants to go into a world where we are literally fighting, with just the most horrible weapons you can imagine right now in the 21st century. So as much as it is a Georgian self-interest, which I hear, is it not fair to argue that it's also in those other countries, their best interest to say, listen, Georgia, we hear you, we get you, we can't help though, right? Because we're putting ourselves in a more dangerous, worse off spot. Is that a fair argument in your perspective?
Well, of course, if I was for example, a normal German citizen, of course I would come up with that type of argument, because why would I have an additional headache just because you help a small country in Europe? But there is a big contra argument, because whatever is as I said, whatever is happening in Georgia or Ukraine right now, it's like a warning. You don't need tanks to lose your freedom. It can happen slowly through laws, and that targets civil society, free media, non-governmental organizations, and so on and so on. And one of the reasons why we're experiencing a whole-scale war between Russia and Ukraine is because of this ignorance policy. Both of the countries have been claiming it out loud, that we have this very aggressive neighbor who tries its best to regain full control on Georgia and Ukraine. And one of the reasons that this situation today exists is that those countries just speak from their own perspective. But at the same time, you're part of this huge union. You also have former Soviet countries such as Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, for example. And if Russia, in a very unfortunate future, regains control of Georgia and Ukraine, it will go under after its former members. And that's already comes in contrast with the European Union and NATO as well. It's not only our war. That's what those countries should understand. We are not only fighting for our freedom. It's the general understanding of freedom, especially today when there are like big conflicts going on all over the world. You need some peace. You have to have some leading countries who, when they say their statements that we're very worried about the situation in Georgia, you have to have some active mechanism. It doesn't have to be power. It just have to be sanctions, but it has to be very distinct, very strict ones to showcase Russia that it cannot do whatever it wants to. Of course, with the Ukrainian situation, we know that, for example, Germany also cut ties with the natural gas and so on, and that's great. But those countries depended on Russia so much that it took them a literal war to stop that. And that's already a very sad situation, because you have to look at the bigger picture, not only what you want for your country. Because if the Soviet Union in a very I don't want to imagine such future is created again, that's a huge threat to the whole world, and we already lived through that, I think.
So I'm not diminishing the argument that it's a huge threat for the world, but I do hear this argument a lot from my friends. I would say more in the neoconservative right. They will in one argument say that Russia is, they're the biggest bully in the world. They're the next leading threat behind China. And then I hear other, in that the same folks in the same breath say also Russia is nothing more than a gas station, out in Northern Europe and Northern Asia. And they don't really have much of an economy. As a matter of fact, if you were to rank the Russian economy right next to the United States, I think there's like a handful of states that actually have a higher GDP than Russia does, right? So I guess I'm having trouble putting those two arguments together, that Russia is the next superpower threat we have to be concerned with behind China, and then the fact that they are a gas station out in the middle of Europe. So help me, I guess, rectify those two contrasting camps. Is Russia actually a threat, not just to the former Soviet countries that we mentioned here today, including Georgia, but to the world? And if so, then help me understand that their economy and what Russia produces beyond bombs and bullets actually is going to put them on a stage from an economic standpoint where they can hold their own on a global stage.
No, I definitely agree, especially with the ongoing situation. Their economical situation got very worse, especially after the Western countries, including US, all of them took kind of their companies and many initiatives they had in the country that was keeping their economy going. And there are a lot of Russians, I would say maybe 40%, who fled the country because living there is very uncomfortable and almost impossible at this point, since the prices went up and the living situation goes down and down. But at the same time, when you are that, I would say, desperate, you will go to any extent. And even though Ukraine is having help from most European countries, US, and they have the best working machines to protect itself from Russia, it's still, this war is still going on. This country still makes it worse. Of course, it's the situation is horrible there, because they're basically making all of their citizens to go to the war by force. But it's still happening. Russia cannot be defeated yet. And unfortunately, it also has very interesting partners, as you mentioned, for example, China. So there is also a big possibility that those countries, for example, China and also and Russia, collaborate together for the bigger cause. That also might not happen. But at the same time, Russia also has bigger partner countries, for example, such as Belarus, and Russia has control over Chechnya, and also they are trying to do its best with Georgia. And if they regain control of the Georgia, one of the core arguments for the West is that they will have a direct access to the West, because one of the reasons why either US or European Union invested so much in this country is that you have an access to the sea and you have the direct access to the Russia. So we are kind of the bridge between the two, like core in the middle of Asia and Russia, Asia and Europe. So that's one of the reasons why those countries invested, especially US, I would say, so much money into Georgia. And now basically all of this is going to the drain. So yes, Russia is a huge threat, and unless it's very hard for other countries to see unless you experience it on yourself. And I've seen it, I've protested against it, and I'm sure it can only get worse at this point.
Lika K, unfortunately, we are hard pressed for time, which means we are going to go ahead and start to wrap things up. I want to go ahead and turn things over to you first for our final thoughts today. So, Lika, bring us home. What would you like the call to action to be for the audience today as they listen to the breakdown of what's taking place in Georgia? How can we help? All that and more.
Well, that's definitely a tough question. But definitely, it's very nice to see that so many people know what is happening in Georgia and appreciate it. They always always say that they are so proud of Georgian people for going against their government and Russian influence in general. But it would be very nice from the government to see some very decisive steps, very concrete measures, what they can do. To show support to the people, and also kind of limits the power of the government. Some type of mechanism, some type of the very strict mechanism to make them redo the elections, for us to change the government and finally have someone we actually elected. That would be the best way out. But of course, it's a very long game, and I'm very, very much proud of my people because I think they're doing an amazing job. It's just we do need help because those protests cannot go forever. And as we are happy to hear the statements there, we're very worried, we're stressed what is happening in Georgia. We need very strict measures against the government to help us regain our democratic freedom.
Lika K, it's time to go ahead and let folks know where they can go ahead and follow you. So that being said, social media links, where's the best place for folks to reach out?
Definitely on LinkedIn, I would say. That's where all of my articles are, and that's the easiest platform, I would say.
Perfect. Lika, I really appreciate you coming on the show today. Definitely, a story that I think more folks need to hear. So with that being said, I'm going to include all those links in the show notes. And folks, if you want to go ahead and connect with Lika, please do so. If you do, tell her you heard her over here on the Brian Nichols Show. And with that being said, folks, if you got some value from today's episode, which I know you did, please head over to your favorite platform that you like to share content and give today's episode a share. When you do, tag yours truly at B Nichols Liberty. You can find me on Facebook, on Twitter, and over on Instagram. As for the Brian Nichols Show itself, find us on your favorite podcasting or video platforms. For video, Rumble, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. We are airing the show live on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday nights currently at 9 p.m. Eastern. Got lots of exciting stuff, by the way, behind the scenes. I don't know, maybe joining a different network coming up here really soon. Going to be doing some more live content. I'm really excited. I hope you all get ready to roar. And other than that, if you want to go ahead and check out the Brian Nichols Show on the go, head over to your favorite podcasting platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, wherever it is you get your podcasting content. Hit subscribe to the Brian Nichols Show, and of course, hit download all unplayed episodes. That's the only place you can find all 965 other episodes we have here of the show. So one more time, Brian Nichols Show. com is where you can go ahead and find the main website. Also, please support the sponsors who support us, including our phenomenal studio sponsor, Cardio Miracle. Use code TBNS at checkout for 15% off. Lika, any final thoughts as we wrap things up today?
Thank you so much for having me here. It was lovely to be able to share more things about Georgia and also discuss my article, and it was a pleasure.
Absolutely. Well, Lika, thank you for joining us. With that being said, Brian Nichols signing off here on The Brian Nichols Show. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to The Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.